If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
People who venture deep into wooded trails and forests, have you ever had any strange sightings or creepy people encounters that chilled you to the core?
Skinwalker. I just saw the creepiest shit I have ever witnessed in my life. While taking out the trash for my mom, I saw a woman on all fours. However, she was completely oblivious to my presence. I couldn't believe it. She stopped abruptly when she saw me. I swore I shit my pants when she stared at me. She kept staring at me, never leaving my eyes. I couldn't see her face, only her silhouette and stringy black hair. And thereafter, she curled into a ball and screamed. She was screaming as if a demon were being ripped out of her. I ran like I was trying to win a gold medal. I noped out of there, told my mom what I saw, and contacted my friends about what I saw. They didn't believe me even though I insisted I saw her. One of my friends decided to go check it out, and guess what? He didn't see anyone out there. But that's not the end of this story. After my friend saw this woman or thing, he messaged us, freaking out that someone was banging on the door. She ducking followed him home. She ran from the road, unseen, and followed my friend home. Then he stepped outside after this thing stopped pounding on the door. He's dumb as hell, I swear. He told us he could hear screaming in the woods after all of this. A grave in the woods. I live in a very rural area, and there are wide, vast landscapes and woods close to our town. I occasionally go for a run on these abandoned trails but usually avoid the woods. I love nature, but I've had some mildly creepy encounters there with farmers who drive around taking care of the fields. Therefore, I only extend my run through the woods if I see other walkers or people with their dogs on the path leading into them. Otherwise, I stay on the paths along the fields. Last year we had a very mild winter, and I felt somewhat brave on one of those warmer days, so I decided to take a longer run in the afternoon through the woods against my gut feeling. I just wanted to see all the trees and their branches covered in snow since I imagined it to be a beautiful scene. And it indeed was very peaceful on top. There wasn't a single soul around when I suddenly passed a wood glade and noticed a nun standing in the middle of it, staring at a wooden cross and praying. I assume it was some kind of grave since the cross was all decorated with flowers and such. I felt uncomfortable because I wasn't sure if I was trespassing on private property, but I watched the scene out of curiosity while slowing down from running to a brisk walk. I eventually picked up my pace again as sudden questions popped into my head. Why is there a grave in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods, easily 3 miles away from the nearest neighborhood? What is the nun doing there? We don't have any form of abbey in this town. I just felt paranoid and, to no one's surprise, hit a new running pace afterwards. Lol. I'm curious to visit this glade someday with someone and see what actually is there. I know it isn't super creepy per se, but on that particular day it just felt overall creepy, especially with being completely alone out there. I was around 10 years old, and my parents would take us to Meacham Lake campgrounds to camp for the whole summer. The first night we were there, we had set up camp and eaten some food, and my parents had quite a lot to drink with their friends, so needless to say, by the time they came in the tent to sleep, they were passed out. We were sharing this one big tent, me, my parents, and my uncle. While I was lying there trying to fall asleep, I suddenly got an absolutely horrifying feeling. It came completely out of nowhere, and I felt freezing cold and completely panicked. Shortly after the onset of this feeling, I heard the sound of breaking sticks and began to approach the tent slowly, panting. At this point I'm so scared that I'm paralyzed and can't even speak. I didn't even want to make a noise to wake up my parents because I was terrified that this thing would try to come into the tent. This thing began walking around our tent. It was walking upright like a human, with its body pushed up against the tent as it was circling it, almost like it wanted me to see it and be aware of it. I was so scared for the first few hours that it was circling the tent. It hadn't even registered in my mind that my uncle's window was unzipped so I could see through it when it walked by and actually get a look at it. I ended up looking at it as it passed by my uncle's window, and what I saw was not normal. This thing looked like a pale, emaciated humanoid monster. It didn't have hair on its head, and its eyes were black. This damn thing circled around the tent all night long until the sun came up, and it just left. I told my parents and uncle about it that morning, freaking out and shaking. They didn't take me seriously, probably thought I just had a bad dream, but I know what a bad dream is, and I was up all night, didn't sleep a wink, just shivering in terror over this thing all night. I even was so exhausted I slept all day, so I highly doubt it was a bad dream because clearly I hadn't slept if I was tired enough to sleep the entire day away the next morning. There is a satanic cult in the woods of Maryland. My dad told me a story about when he was younger. He and his friends would always go into the woods doing dumb shit like youths do. They decided to scare him and his friend by leaving them in the truck. As my dad and his friend walked through the deep MD forests, they noticed smoke on a hill. They decided to look closer and saw up to 5 people chanting around a fire with black robes on. My dad and his friend booked through the woods, finally finding their friends, who realized they were shook. They said, "We were going to come back." My dad responded, "You don't understand what we just saw over that hill." After he told them, one responded with, "I've heard about this, and apparently there are quite a few satanic cults in the MD woods. When I was younger, I always wondered why we never went camping, or why he would always tell me, absolutely do not go into these woods at night. I always thought he was just being an overprotective parent, but now I know why." Night in the woods. I'm typing this just as I got home, and I'm getting more creeped out the more I think about this. So I and 2 friends were in the woods at a sort of park just outside town. There's a cool scrapyard with a bunch of old quarry equipment that we were checking out, and by the time we're about to leave, it's gone from dusk to dark. We use the flashlights on our phones to navigate out of the scrapyard until we get to the trail. Getting ready for a 10-minute walk out, we decide to cut the lights and see if our eyes will adjust. This scrapyard is in an open part of the woods, and we were just going back into the tree line on the trail when I heard a stick crack and leaves rustling right to our left, about 5 feet in front of us right off the trail. Not knowing what this was, I stopped walking for a second to make sure I wasn't just hearing things. I couldn't really see anything, but as I was pulling out my phone to turn on the flashlight, this weird, deep, but loud growl came from right in front of us. Right away we all just sprinted away and back towards the scrapyard. We decided to go through the scrapyard and onto the trail on the other side that led right out to the road, which was a 15-minute walk away from the parking lot where my car was. When we got back to my car, there was a police car parked in front of me, blocking it off. We saw the cop at the entrance to the trails with a flashlight on and waited for her to come to us. She asked us if we had seen a person in the woods and described him as 5 feet 7 inches, wearing all black with long blonde hair. We asked her if he was missing, and she said no, he's not a missing person, but they're looking for him. We told her we hadn't seen him, she took our names, and then we left. Upon leaving, we saw a total of 11 cop cars spread out, some together along this road beside the woods. I originally thought that we encountered a black bear, however, my friend, who was with us, hunts a lot and said it definitely wasn't a bear, and in fact, he had never heard an animal make a growl like that before, and I have to admit, neither have I. The growl sounded weirdly human, almost too perfectly scary. Plus, if it was a bear, by running away we would have been mauled. I'm really confused and, honestly, creeped out. We've looked at several videos of different animals growling, but there are not too many where I live. Was it the guy the police were looking for? Was he insane? If it was this guy who growled at us, why? We are going back to the spot tomorrow, this time with some bear mace and knives, etc., just in case, to see if we can find any bear paw prints anywhere around. Something happened over 40 years ago, and it still freaks me out. I was visiting a friend that lived deep in the Appalachians near Hot Springs, Virginia. We were coming home fairly late after an evening of fun. We turned on one of the winding country roads and came to a fork in the road. When I made a turn, the headlights lit up a black blob crouching behind a bush. It stood up, and we realized that it was over 7 feet tall. As it stood, we saw a white face, but it wasn't one. I can only describe it as something in a big black shroud with what looked like a sun-bleached, huge cow skull. I think about 5 minutes passed before I asked my friend if she saw something. I asked her to describe what she saw, and it was exactly what I saw. The following morning, we informed her parents about our observations, fully anticipating their outburst of laughter and accusations of excessive drinking. I've never seen faces drain color so quickly. The dad said he had heard of people seeing this thing on their farms only to come outside the following day to find slaughtered sheep. He also knew of someone that almost hit it when it darted out in front of them. Her dad then asked if we heard any sounds during the encounter. That's when my friend and I remembered a very low, very loud growl-like sound. We were so freaked out by what we saw that the sound wasn't processed by our brains until the next morning. I've had some freaky shit happen to me during my 6 decades on this earth. This one still sends shivers down my spine. I love the forest, but I certainly don't want to die there. I live in southern Oregon. This stunning region in the west is home to some of the most breathtaking forests one can ever witness. I am intimately familiar with the national forest that surrounds my home. Stories from the past about remote locations with peculiar names often entice me to explore and experience a sense of nostalgia. These forests also have things about them that are off. Locals talk about how people disappear all the time in the woods, sometimes over drugs, sometimes over foul play, and other times people just go for a hunt or hike and are never seen again. disappear without a trace. I have spent years in the deep wilderness hiking almost every day. The incident I'm about to tell you changed how I felt about the forest. My roommate and I left our home on the outskirts of the forest for a hike to a place that is basically a swamp flat, a small area of marshy swamp in a bowl-like canyon high up in the mountains. There's one road in and one road out. As we climbed the mountain, the rain had started to pick up. It had been mostly drizzle that day, but living in the Pacific Northwest, you get used to that, and it doesn't stop you from adventure. Upon reaching the flats, we are ready to begin our exploration. We walk the trail into the flats, and as we admire the old-growth trees surrounding the marsh, the wind starts to pick up. There was a nasty storm coming in. The trees started to rock back and forth and make horrible snapping sounds, and there aren't many safe places in a forest like this to take shelter from falling trees and branches, so we decided it was time to hike out. We hiked back to the car, relieved to get inside and escape the storm. We parked the car in a small turnout on the side of the road. We sat there in the car for a few moments, taking off our jackets, turning on the heat, and doing other things. That's when the truck pulled up. A really old, beat-up pickup truck drives up and parks in front of our car, not completely blocking it, but coming dangerously close. A burly man steps out of the driver's seat and turns and looks at us. I have to say, this is the only time in my entire life that I have thought to myself, something here isn't right. The look on this guy's face gave me that instinctual feeling of fight or flight. As we watch him walk around his truck, I tell my roommate, "Go. Just go. Start the car and leave. Now." As he starts the car and begins to pull off, the man reaches behind the seat of his truck and pulls out a long rifle. At that moment, my roommate ignited the gas and swiftly fled the scene. As we pulled away, the man pulled the gun out, pointed it in our direction, and looked me right in the eyes. The feeling I got was, "You're going to die today." I will never forget the look on his face. We got home, told our neighbors about the incident, and proceeded with our day. When we got into the car the next morning to drive to town, the starter failed on the car. I often think to myself, had it failed up there, or had that bad storm not come in and shoot us away, things could very well have gone south that day. Weird tent in the woods. Growing up, I was always at my grandma's house. My childhood was challenging due to a parent with substance abuse issues, so going to my grandma's house was a relief. I had friends there, and she lived in a lovely suburb with tons of other kids my age. I made really good friends with a neighbor who had woods in his backyard. Let's call him Mike for the sake of this story. We'd often take little lunches packed by my grandma and go out into the woods to eat them and admire creeks and birds, collect pebbles and stuff. Kid stuff. This was harmless, and you could usually always see the backs of houses when you went into the woods. I remember one day we made a pack, mine was in a grocery bag, and planned to venture out further than before. You know how you have limitless energy when you're little and low back pain hasn't set in yet from sitting at a desk for most of your adult life. You could literally walk for hours, and probably many miles, without even noticing, eat a crappy PB&J and a can of Coke, and be completely rejuvenated. Yeah, that was us. We walked further than we ever had before. We descended a hill, which I recall being quite daunting, and amusingly, I still have a significant fear of falling while hiking. I got a little scuffed up, nothing major. Mike was slightly older than me, so I wanted to seem tough and just walked it off. We walked deep into the woods, and I remember being just slightly creeped out but not enough to protest. I wanted to explore, too. This is in western PA, I should add. We weren't in the rural areas of my state, but some of the suburbs do intersect with trails and nature preserves, which can go on for acres and acres. We came upon a tent. In the middle of freaking nowhere, not a marked camping area, just like in the middle of nothing. I remember being terrified. My grandma gave me a lot of freedom because I was a pretty responsible kid, and it was also the 90s. Aside from needing to be home by streetlights every night, stranger danger was something she drilled into my head. This set off the internal stranger danger alarm loudly, but at this point I was too afraid to leave Mike's side. So we go to the tent, even though I want to leave. Mike approaches the tent, and I hesitantly follow him. At first, I thought someone was just camping, but it looked more permanent than that. Anyway, there's a fire that's out but still smoking like it had been doused. Bones were scattered everywhere. Skulls, mostly. The tiny skulls, to my untrained eye, resembled animal bones. There were also little pelts of animals covered in what looked like paint and symbols. My adrenaline kicked me right in the ass, and I ran. Mike ran, too. We ran so far and so fast that we fell down the side of a hill, and we ended up emerging from the woods on the other end of a shooting range. The men firing were screaming at us to leave, understandably. How stupid we were. I was so scared of the tent that I didn't process the real danger, which was the shooting range. We definitely could have died very tragically there. So looking back on this memory, I'm wondering, was this something nefarious? Or could it have been a harmless nomad living in the woods? If they were living there, maybe the bones were from a small game they had to eat to survive. However, the symbols engraved on the pelts are quite intriguing. I don't know. This is a weird memory that I still can see clearly to date. What do you think? I know my dogs go crazy at the dumbest things, but situations like today are exactly why I don't make a real effort to train it out of them. This is pretty ironic, given yesterday I made a post joking about them being super suspicious of the mailman. I have 2 Australian Shepherds, one is my personal dog, and the other is a foster dog. Both are roughly 60 pounds. I took them on a walk today at a local wilderness area that consists of about 50 miles of trails in total. I've been there many times with just my dog and never had problems. Anyways, we're walking down the trail, and they do bark at a few people we see. Every time I see someone, we step to the side off the trail and let them pass. I apologize for them. The person smiles and keeps walking, and we all carry on. So when I see this one guy approaching, the dogs go into alert mode, and we step off so he can pass. He gets up to us and stops and says, "Oh, I don't think your dog's like me." I told him, "No, they're just nervous." I apologize for them being so loud, and at this point I'm holding them by their harnesses, so they're super close to me. But they're going crazy, angry barking, lunging, growling, etc. I know that's not great behavior, but nonetheless. He tells me, "I'm sorry they don't like me, I'm so sorry." At this point, I'm weirded out because he's not broken eye contact and seems rather unfazed by the dogs. I reassure him once more that it's okay and not his fault, then I tell the dogs, "Let's go," and start guiding them away. He says he's going to keep moseying up the trail. I say, "All right," and tell him to have a good day, and we walk off in opposite directions. I thought it was a strange interaction, but hey, we can all be a little weird, so I didn't think much of it. About 2 minutes later, though, I hear him call out from behind me, and I turn around to see him approaching. He says, "I just really want to be friends with your dogs. I don't want to leave them on bad terms, and I want to make friends," as he keeps walking up. When I come upon nervous dogs, I leave them alone. Or, if I do try to make friends, I squat down, talk gently to them, extend a hand, etc. He never did this, though, and I swear he never even looked at my dogs, because he kept looking at me the whole time. This time, the dogs are going absolutely nuts again, but I don't grab their harnesses. I let them have the full length of the leash to put some distance between us and the man. He keeps telling me repeatedly he just wants to be friends. I tell him I don't think it'll happen, that they're just not there yet. He does try to approach still, but the dogs have none of that. He eventually says, "I'm sorry. I don't think they're going to be friends with me." But again, he isn't even paying attention to the dogs. So I tell him no, the dogs aren't friendly, and they won't let him get any closer. He finally turns and leaves, and I call my sister for the remainder of the walk. So is it annoying that my dogs freak out over the mailman, or the neighbors, or a knocking noise on the TV show? Yes, it is. Although I'm uncertain about the man's intentions today, I'm incredibly grateful that they were present and made it clear he wasn't pursuing me. I'll probably work with them on calming down quicker, but I have no plans to have them befriend strangers at first sight. Creepy sounds in the woods. This may be weird, but online search hasn't helped me much. Has anyone heard an off-putting screeching sound in the woods in south-central Alaska? I was camping near Kane's Head in Resurrection Bay recently, and I heard a very odd sound in the woods that creeped me out. It sounded just like screeching tires, or at least that's how my brain processed it. I live near a busy road in Anchorage, so I initially thought nothing of it. However, half a second later, I interrupted myself mid-sentence and jumped out of my seat, realizing, why would I be hearing screeching tires in the woods? My dog heard it too because she jumped out of her slumber and started barking and growling in that direction. We were at the Derby Cove cabin, and the sound came from the east, over the water. My buddy, who I was talking to, didn't hear it but was creeped out just based on our reactions. In summary, it signaled the conclusion of our campfire time that night. So, my question is, does anyone have any idea what this could have been? We stared into the woods for a while and didn't see a damn thing. It was around 12:30 at night, and the weather was great. We saw no signs of animals nearby before this. Large headlands separated us from the nearest campers, who were at least a half-mile away. My only reasonable thought is that it was a porcupine scream, which I've heard on video, but what I heard was a single screech that lasted a second or two, not a number of consecutive screams. Someone help me figure this out, or at least toss in an anecdote of your own. Followed off trail. When I was in high school, I spent a lot of time at the local park. I always tried to find the most solitary spots so I could smoke weed. This meant most of my hiking was on overgrown trails, if not off trail. The park's main area has an entry fee, but the west side is free since it's so big. Those spots are less maintained and less monitored, so obviously it's mostly kids who just come to smoke and graffiti. But of course there are still some runners, people fishing, dog walkers, etc., who want to skip out on the $5 fee. One Sunday I go to smoke at the park while my family attends church. At this spot, I had a solid trail that led to a very solitary part of the park, which I frequented if I just wanted to smoke and not explore. When I pull in, there are already a few cars, but one of them sticks out to me. It is a very clean black car parked right in front of the main trail. A man in his late 30s or 40s gets out of the car as I approach the trail. As I entered the trail, I maintained eye contact with him, and he appeared to be observing me as well. However, after a few steps on the trail, another man abruptly stopped me. Apparently someone had driven a car into the reservoir the day before, and he asked if I was coming to look at it. I said no, saw a small crowd of people at the cliff of the trail, and figured I could be less on guard since everyone would be over there, and I could smoke in peace. After the man I was speaking with walked away, I looked back to see if the man at the car was still watching me. I did not see him anymore. So I went on that trail I frequent and hiked up to the solitary part of the park, then went a little off trail for even more privacy and sat on a fallen tree to smoke. As I reach into my bag for my blunt, I look up, and just a few feet in front of me is the man at the car. He was standing facing me and did not seem fazed when I realized he was there. My heart sank and my stomach turned. I listened to a lot of true crime, so immediately in my head I was like, don't act like a victim, be confrontational, and said, can I help you? He kind of grinned and responded, no, just looking. So instead of my blunt, I grabbed my pepper spray and phoned to text my family and tell them where I was. I kept my eyes on him the whole time I did this, and he did not move an inch, just watched me. So I sent a text, put my phone up, and just watch him back, finger on the trigger of my pepper spray. Then he starts moving, so I stand up. He does not get any closer but starts to circle me still a few feet away. Remember that we are off trail, so as he moves around me, he is harder to see behind all the shrubbery. But I stay on my feet and make sure I am facing him the whole time. He tucks his face away so we can't make eye contact, but he knows I see him. So after he makes a full circle around me, he turns back to the trail and starts walking back to the main trail. I am afraid of losing sight of him, so I follow him from a distance. He does not turn to look back at me. Finally, we get back to the busier part of the trail, and I spot a woman walking her dogs. He goes off on another trail, and I go to her and tell her a man has been following me, but when I look up to point him out, he is gone. She tells me that's scary, and I just say, be careful, then go to my car and leave. It was obviously a very creepy encounter and potential close call, but sometimes I feel there is even a little bit more to it. This encounter took place about 40 minutes from Delphi, Indiana, in September of 2016. A few months later, in February of 2017, 13 and 14-year-old Abigail Williams and Liberty German were murdered while hiking at their local park. Their murderer has never been found. I am 16 and from the UK. I have a difficult time expressing my emotions and will usually walk in the woodland area down by my house to clear my head. It always works and is especially effective at times from 10 o'clock to 2:30, and I've never had any problems with these walks. Today I left the house a little after 10 and decided a quick walk before it got dark would be best. I got to the darkest area of the woods, yet it still looked light between the trees, so I continued on. I kept walking until I reached the metal bridge over a thin stream. Now, at this point, I could keep walking my usual path or go to my left and take a longer route that I am unfamiliar with. I would never have gone to look down this second option, but something made me want to go explore a slight bit into the area. It was still light after all. I ended up in that unknown area for around 5 minutes before deciding to head back, as it had suddenly gotten dark very quickly. I turned around with my phone's torch lighting up a path I was completely unfamiliar with, but I knew it was the only way out and decided to follow it back. This path was strangely unfamiliar despite it being the same route I had taken into the area. I kept walking and realized I had no memory of entering this new section of the woods and became very panicked and distressed. However, I made it back to the metal bridge and crossed back to my usual path. I walked along my route and made it to my favorite spot at the bottom of a 200-foot quarry, which has become overgrown with summer vegetation, where I decided to rest my legs and read a book I had brought with me. I sat with my torch facing the book, reading quietly to myself and hearing a faint, raspy noise coming from the top of the quarry, almost as if someone were breathing through a gas mask. I closed my book, and the sound was now too prominent to ignore, and I swiveled my torch in the direction of the sound, and it took a gasp, almost as if it were holding its breath. I pointed my torch back to my bag to zip it up and put my book away, and the sound became heavier. Once I'd finished putting my book away, I placed the torch in my lap so that the light was on my face and began to search the tree line at the top of the quarry to see if I could spot anyone, but when I looked directly at the sound, it once again took a short gasp and stopped. I was so scared that I stood up, and the noise began to move away from me and round the top of the quarry, still rasping, and now rocks were crunching underneath some sort of weight. It was the first time in my life that I was frozen and began hyperventilating due to my fear. I stood still in the dark, listening to this thing that had stalked me for the past 5 minutes slowly move across the quarry's ridge and seeing rocks falling down to my level. I genuinely believed that someone wearing some sort of breathing device had been listening to me read my book and watched as I tried to find out where they were. I don't know what compelled me to go into the unknown area or why I decided to go to the quarry despite it being so late, but I am now certain of one thing. I am never going into that quarry alone again, no matter how bad emotions become. Someone who looks just like me is stalking me. I got off work at around 10 p.m. and headed home. I live alone and always make sure my front door is locked before I leave for work, but when I got home, it was unlocked. I was certain that I had locked my front door when I left, as I always do. I have OCD and am too obsessed with my routine to forget to lock my door. I was thoroughly unsettled by the scenario and immediately retrieved my 9mm pistol from the drawer next to my front door. I set the bag of fast food I had picked up down and looked around the dark living room, fumbling for the light switch. Once the light flicked on, to my utter horror, my apartment was in complete disarray. Paperwork was strewn all over the floor that had been put away in my office, and my social security card and birth certificate were among the mess. I quickly made my way to my office, and once I entered the room, I found all the drawers were open and my computer had been turned on and was on the lock screen as if someone had tried to get into my computer. I checked the rest of my apartment and didn't find anybody. I put my gun back and immediately phoned the police. They arrived fairly quickly and took a report of the break-in. They asked me if I had any enemies or if I had made anyone mad recently, to which I responded that I hadn't. No such thing had occurred, and furthermore, I am not the type to have quarrels with people. I was quite dumbstruck by what I had come home to. I cleaned up the mess and attempted to sleep but tossed and turned most of the night while lying with my gun under my pillow. I would like to add that I am also a very paranoid person, so the whole thing naturally had me freaked out, and every night I go to bed, I have my gun under my pillow. The next day I had off, so I left to go hiking with my girlfriend. We started dating 6 months ago. I left around 9 a.m. and stopped by the Starbucks next to my apartment. While I sat in the busy drive-through line, I looked up and noticed a man staring at me from across the street on the same side as my apartment complex. The thing that was the most interesting about this man was how much of a resemblance to me he bore. This guy had the same hair as me, was about the same height and weight, wore glasses like me, and looked to be about the same age as me. He didn't appear to have any expression on his face and just stood there still as a statue staring at me. It was my turn to get my order, so I grabbed my coffee, and when I went to pull out of the drive-thru, the man was gone. The day went as planned, and my girlfriend and I had a great day together. I told her about the incident at my apartment involving the man who looked like me, and she joked that perhaps my doppelgänger had broken into my apartment. After I parted ways with my girlfriend, I made my way home. I was a little bit nervous to return home, fearing whoever had broken into my apartment might have returned. Whatever they were there for that night, they seemed to be looking for something. I arrived back at my apartment and made my way to my apartment unit. I live upstairs, and as I approached the stairs to my front door, I heard someone coming down the stairs. I was still a good distance from the stairwell and was alarmed, as I didn't have a neighbor who lived upstairs, therefore, no one should have been coming down those stairs. I stopped to see who it was and to my shock it was none other than the same man I had seen earlier that morning. He walked quickly and looked down as he walked. I shouted at him to stop, but as soon as he heard me, he took off running and hopped the fence that separates the apartment complex from a large field, disappearing into the night. I ran upstairs to my apartment and tried the doorknob, which was once again unlocked. I went inside and was horrified. All over the walls in my living room were pictures of me and my girlfriend from that day. The pictures appeared to have been taken from the tree line next to the trail we were on. I once again called the police to report the break-in. They came and searched the apartment as well as the entire complex. I told them about the man I had seen running into the field. They searched the field and returned with a pair of eyeglasses and a wig. The police took the items they found into evidence and opened a case. They stationed 2 police cars outside my apartment and informed the apartment manager about what was going on. It's been almost a week since this all started, and nothing else has happened since. No more random break-ins or creepy photos of me and my girlfriend. I've also been staying with a coworker of mine until things die down. I have no idea why whoever is doing this is targeting me. Based on the items found by the police in the field, I guess this person might be pretending to be me for some unknown reason. I don't know what any of this means. We have a 100-acre property with a family hunting cabin off-grid right in the middle of the property and next to a river, no neighbors, and the road to get in is only known by family. We also have a big I-beam gate we keep locked. There's an occasional black bear/coyote, but nothing crazy, not very dangerous. I'm up for one of my cousins having some beers on a weekend, playing cribbage, and listening to music. We were preparing to conclude our evening around midnight when, unexpectedly, there was a very loud banging on the back door. The door and windows trembled visibly, emitting a sound similar to wham. 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 Then it just stops. And then it's absolutely dead quiet, no frogs or crickets anymore. Nothing. We're frozen in place, staring at the back door, the music quickly turned off by my cousin. After a pause that seems like forever, the sounds of the woods start coming back, slowly. We work up the courage to look out the windows, and it's just pitch black out there. Shining a flashlight, there's nothing but the woods. My cousin thought he saw the reflection of eyes, but I didn't see it. Armed only with a pocket knife, we secured all the doors and windows and remained in the loft until dawn. We didn't sleep a wink, and when daylight came, we quickly left the place. The metal back door sustained dents from the impact, necessitating the replacement of the door jamb due to its deteriorating condition. We both still have no idea what the hell happened. The fake sheriff approached us while camping. This event happened about 15 years ago. So my buddies and I went fish camping at a pretty remote lake off of a 4x4 trail about 2 hours from home. There were 4 of us, all men, with me being the smallest at 195 pounds, important later. The camping spot has great fishing, as it has a nice deep spot with lots of trout right next to it, but the campground itself is rough. It is on the side of a steep hill with barely enough room for tents and a small fire ring. It is accessible by a rough, steep, winding 100-yard trail from where you park your 4x4 above the camp. We had a great day drinking beers and catching our limits of nice-sized trout. After it got dark, we made a small fire and just bullshitted the night away. It was a great time. Suddenly, there was someone shining a blinding light in our eyes from about 10 to 20 yards away. We didn't hear this person approach at all. This person announced themselves as the sheriff. One of my friends asked, "Are you our county's name, sheriff?" The stranger didn't respond to the question. Instead, he shined a light in each of our faces, then said, "Have a good night," and then walked off. We sat there dumbfounded, asking each other, what the hell was that? After a minute or two, my curiosity overcame me, prompting me to illuminate this person with my incredibly powerful flashlight. He was about 50 to 60 yards away at this point, near a crest and bend in the trail, just before he went out of sight. We all saw it. It was just some dude in a flannel shirt and jeans. I said, "That is not a real sheriff." He must have heard me, because he started moving quickly for a moment before disappearing. A few moments later we heard an engine start, and that was that. It's strange that we didn't hear the vehicle earlier, but I attribute that to our drunken state and loudness. Now what makes this kind of scary? What if it weren't 4 big dudes he approached? What if it was a single person or a couple? What would he intend to do? Should we have chased after this person? Debatable. Should we have reported the incident to the actual sheriff's department? Absolutely, but sadly we never did. I was in Macedonia, in Ohrid, staying with my uncle in his villa in the mountains surrounding the lake. Anyway, one Saturday, I went to my favorite lookout spot after breakfast, around 10 Amish. It was a rock formation. The rock formation offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding hills, vineyards, a valley, the woods below, and Lake Ohrid beyond. I decided to hike down the hill, a slow, rocky, meandering path. Going downhill was a breeze. I reached the lower valley, surrounded by dense forest. I was completely engrossed in the moment. I had my walking stick and my cell phone, and nobody knew where I was. Anyway, I remember walking, and walking, and walking. And it was all trees. Everywhere. And it was fully shaded. And cooler. An hour later, I realized that I was a bit disoriented and tried getting my bearings. There wasn't a clearing. I couldn't see through the canopy of trees. I kept thinking that when I was up on my rock, I remember seeing openings. But where were they? I continued walking as straight as possible. I had zero fear of these unfamiliar woods. I might have been overconfident. I was simply carefree. Anyway, something told me to turn direction. I turned right. I started walking in that direction. I didn't know if that was north, south, east, or west. I just followed my gut. I eventually walked into a tiny clearing. Right there stood a tiny chapel with a door and windows. I walked up and opened the door. It was a Greek Orthodox chapel. It smelled like candles. I took pictures with my phone. I went back outside. I took a seat on the stoop. It was 1 p.m. I decided to retrace my steps as best as I could. I didn't leave anything to mark my path. I just said, "Okay, Alita. Don't panic." I was unusually calm. That's not like me. I'm high-strung. However, that was not the case on that particular day. I ended up walking away from the chapel along the same path I had taken. After about half an hour, I made a left turn. I proceeded to walk in that direction. It eventually started to feel like a low incline. I knew I would soon leave the forest and head back uphill. The weird thing about all of this is 1. I wasn't an experienced hiker. The last time I'd gone hiking was in the dunes. Along Lake Michigan, in Indiana. I went hiking with my ex-husband and a group of friends. Climbing up Mount Baldy. 2. I literally had an incredible sense of peace and almost innocence. It's difficult to describe, but I had absolutely no thoughts of danger. 3. I remember hearing in my mind, "You have to turn now," 2 times. I just listened without questioning. I was nearly at a loss for words. Apart from feeling happy. 4. At that time in my life, I was learning how to live as a single woman after my divorce. I was very uncertain about many things. But not that day. So I ended up out of the woods, and just started hiking upwards. The hike became more challenging due to the heat, but it was still manageable. And I ended up right at the base of my favorite rock formation. I literally retraced every single step. I finally got to my uncle's house after 3 p.m., and he and my aunt were happy to see me. My uncle told me there were loads of wild boar and wolves in the hills and forests. That day was so strange to me. I had never been a solo adventurer before that day. Yet, I never once thought of any danger, even when in a precarious situation. Maybe this isn't high strangeness to you all. Or maybe listening to this, you think it's common sense. Go down a mountain, go up a mountain, no big deal. Well, it was a big deal for me. I had never done anything like that before, either alone or with others. And I managed to do it perfectly. It was as if I had prior experience to draw from, and I relished every moment of it, free from anxiety. It's like I was another person. I knew exactly what to do, like before I found the chapel. I heard, "You need to turn right." Then after leaving the chapel. After I retraced my steps as best as I could. I remember hearing, "Okay, turn left now." This ultimately led me up the mountain and directly to my favorite rock formation. Thanks for listening, guys. Night vision. It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he'd left them at my apartment. One night I was bored and decided to go try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area/nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself, and female, but I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods, my best friend and I had hiked there at night before, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign "Park closes at 10, and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I'd found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini maglite on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity, hopefully the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near pitch darkness into bright as day. Everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this: a man, dressed entirely in dark-colored clothing, was stealthily making his way through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter. There were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly horribly aware of my situation, a young woman alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 90s, so no cell phones, and even if I'd had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had just adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who, or whatever the hell, he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else, a white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I'd turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car, if he'd circled back and seen my parked car, alone in the lot. If he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever but was probably another half hour or so. A heart-stopping moment occurred when he paused right underneath my tree. I was certain he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say "duck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man was there when a rock smashed my windshield and something sharp scraped the car's sides. Presumably, a giant knife, which I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest, was used. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me, and thank God for big trees with sturdy branches. Creepy forest person, let's never meet again. Unsettling encounter with a stranger at my local trail. I had just parked at the local trail I often visit when, about 30 seconds later, an older man parked next to me. He started leaning over as if to ask for directions. I rolled down my window, and he kept trying to peer into my car. I sensed something odd but dismissed it initially and asked if he needed anything. He mentioned he was there for a walk and continued to glance inside my car. He then asked if I wanted company for my walk. I usually go on walks to be alone with my thoughts, so I wasn't interested, especially given his strange behavior. I politely declined and got out of my car. Despite this, he followed me and invaded my personal space, making me uncomfortable with his intense staring and proximity. Although I'm a tall man and wasn't feeling physically threatened, his behavior was disconcerting. After walking together briefly, I excused myself, saying I needed to use the restroom, and started walking faster to create distance. When he tried to keep up, I told him I'd catch up later and quickly left the area, feeling uneasy. I feel a bit guilty, thinking he might just be a lonely old man, but I believe I did the right thing. Normally, I'm not uneasy around others, but something about this interaction felt off. I prefer to trust my instincts in these situations. Stalked in the woods. This may seem like a ramble of thoughts, but after recently discovering this channel, I felt compelled to share an experience my family and I had a few years ago that still brings a shiver down my spine. I have been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon, and I have felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. A few years ago my wife, daughter, and 2 German shepherds went camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I have included the coordinates of our campsite, which we found to be the perfect setup for us and our 2 dogs, who need the privacy since they are intimidating to other dog owners and can be loud when spooked. It was not an established campsite, Just a nice horseshoe off a USFS road that had flat ground, full trees, and a fire pit. The first night my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a two-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away from me and my wife's tent. We made the male German Shepherd sleep, Guts is his name, with her in the tent. That whole first night neither my wife nor I could sleep. We both heard footsteps, and they were heavy, not like typical forest critters scampering around at night. I was well armed because I was paranoid from reading recently before departing about a dad in California who was shot and killed in a tent next to his 2 infant daughters. Needless to say, both my wife and I had 2 pistols, and I had my rifle with me. The dogs are great at detection, and that is why I felt my daughter could sleep alone, because Guts is completely fearless, and nothing would lay a hand on her without a battle to the death. All in all, nothing but bad vibes and loud footsteps occurred that night, which I ultimately decided were deer or maybe some elk. Day 2. Morning. We go for a walk down the road and maybe 300 feet away see the circle area in the photo. I see an abandoned road where a rusted gatepost, the gate was missing, was covered in vegetation. Something of a blue color caught my eye, and Guts immediately took off running down this abandoned road. My heart began to race because I thought it was another family camping like us, and he was going to get himself shot or scare some innocent people to death, so I chased after him as fast as I could, and the rest followed. He stops 20 feet into the road, and I yell his name, but I have covered just enough distance to see that nobody is there, and something is off about the sight. I yell, "Hello, is anyone there? Sorry about the dog." I got no response. My curiosity compels me to investigate the site conditions. As I get closer, I know something is wrong. It had all the necessities for a campsite, including a cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, and folding table, but every single item had been completely destroyed, smashed, and torn from what appeared to be claw marks. We all walked around in circles, puzzled why anyone would leave all their camping gear behind, including an expensive REI tent. I figured someone left in a hurry and animals got to the rest as the only logical explanation. Still, a propane tank and cooler were flattened by something, and it certainly wasn't snowpack with tree coverage in that spot. As the afternoon rolls in, I and my daughter are playing bocce ball at the campsite, and my wife goes walking maybe 70 feet north to do her business. I do not have a direct line of sight on her, but all of a sudden I see Gut make a mad dash straight towards her. Normally he would always be with me unless he was called over, and she didn't call for him. His speed and focus caught my attention, and I knew something weird was happening, so I ran over there, and my wife started jogging at me, and I immediately drew my pistol. Guts has completely continued running into the forest another 100 feet before I call him, and he stops. My other dog, Leah, who never misses the opportunity to be the pack leader, is not taking point. I have had her for now 7 years, and this was the first time in her life she refused to leave my daughter's side. She was full-haired and attached to us at the hip. Again, anytime we hike or play, Leah is up front bossing everything in her path and pauses to look to see where we are and continues. I asked my wife what happened, and she said, "I was trying to pee, and all of a sudden I felt all my hairs raise. I knew someone was watching me, and then I saw Guts running towards me, and I just got up to move towards you." We spent 10 minutes looking for signs of anything and saw no trails, broken branches, or anything to point to what and where something went. We decide we are spending one more night since it's too late to pack up and drive, but we will all be in the big tent together. Before we go to bed, I put a rope with a makeshift coin alarm around the perimeter of our campsite. I used a mint can and some coins and keys from our truck and zip-tied it so anything hitting the rope gave a little jingle. Very unsophisticated, but it put my wife at ease. As I go to tie my last corner off at a tree near our tent, our third mystery item unveils itself. It looks like someone has done the same thing I have done with a rope that was so old and brown I didn't see it at first. It was broken, and only a few pieces remained, but sure enough, it was tied at roughly the same height, 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and even had a few rusted washers on it. I immediately felt someone had stayed here before and put the same makeshift warning system on the same tree I was on maybe 10 to 15 years ago, based on the condition of the rope. Perhaps my paranoia has now reached a new height, but I had to make sure the girls felt we were safe, and at the time the only thing I could think of was when the evening came around, I made them sit in the truck, and I fired a clip of my .45 into the dirt as a signal to whatever was out there that we were armed. I reassured the girls that anybody listening to that now knows we have 2 wolves and are armed, and we are too risky of a target, so we can sleep safely. That night we heard no footsteps, and the dogs never perked up and barked. We left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, and I watched the Amazon Missing 411 Hunted documentary, and I noticed the cluster smack dab close to where we camped that weekend, and a flood of dread rushes me as I think of that mysterious abandoned campsite with the ripped tent and smashed cooler and cooktop. We have been camping since and have enjoyed the beauty of the NW, but there was something there at that place that possibly took or harmed someone else less than 300 feet away from where we camped, and we all thank our lucky stars. Guts was doing his thing so well that afternoon. The creepiest encounter I ever had was camping out near the end of the world. This was sometime in October, I think. Maybe early November. Cold either way. I left work a bit early to get out there before sunset. As I stepped out of the office, I noticed that my truck tire appeared low, not flat, but significantly low. Anyways, I get out my little air compressor and my tire gauge and walk around to the tire. Check the pressure, set the gauge on the tire, and hook up the air pump. Fill until it looks good and go to grab my pressure gauge, except it's gone. I searched the entire area around the truck, but found nothing. Duck it. It's getting dark, I need to set up my tent and get a fire going. Night goes on uneventfully. It's nice to get out of town and have a fire when it's cold and crisp. Crawl into the tent and pass out. Well, I hear something, so I get up out of my tent to see a guy wearing all buckskin standing by my truck, and he's holding my tire gauge. I was startled to see him and jumped back. He, too, was startled and dropped the tire gauge. I ducked into my tent to pull my shoes on and grab my gun. Get back out of the tent, and the guy is gone. Now, do you ever have one of those dreams that feels incredibly real right before waking up, and you have to check to see if it really happened? Yeah, one of those. I wake up from this weird dream in a sort of panic and quickly look out my tent. There was no one present. Dream. I pull on my shoes and get out of the tent. It's still early, and there had been a light frost overnight. My truck is covered, my tent is covered, the ground is covered, except for my tire gauge. Sitting there on the ground next to my tire with no frost on it or around it, like someone had been holding it. Scared the living shit out of me. The cult tried to cut our group off the trail. My family and our friend, 1M, 2F, our kid, and newborn, just went on a walk through a trail near our friend's dad's house. What was supposed to be a relaxing outing started to get strange when a group of what felt like 40, but was probably more like 20, walked past us, most of them wearing the color white. Despite finding this strange, we proceeded along the path. Then they all, instead of leaving, decide to turn around and start catching up and walking behind us. I've walked this trail often enough to know the general area. We get a bit spooked amid their group's excitement and decide to walk onto a path that's not really a trail but offers some cover. We wait for a bit, hearts racing, and I hear a small group on a path above us that would have ended up leading them to cutting us off halfway through the trail. I specifically heard them say something in a questioning manner and about the four of them. We continue waiting a bit until the group on the main path passes, and then we quickly head back the way we came and safely get away. This just happened, and I'm still convincing myself that we were just overthinking, but we had actual fear, and the whole situation just felt so ducking strange. Abandoned cabin in woods. My name is Mickey, and I am a 17-year-old male. I live in a small town with a lot of forest and woods, so it's pretty common to see hunters out and around town with their gear. Hunting's pretty big in our town, and with that comes a few days off early in the school year just for kids to go hunting with their family. Me telling you all this will make more sense pretty soon and will help you make the most of our situation. So about a year ago I was with a small group of close friends named Ethan, Zach, and Joshua. Since our towns are so boring, we have to make do with what we have, and that leads to more illegal activities, like exploring abandoned buildings, since our town has a lot of those. It was getting pretty dark out, and all of us decided to leave Zach's house and go to an abandoned cabin in the woods that our friend earlier that day was telling us about. We texted him and got the address, and unfortunately, he could not go with us that night but told us it's a pretty steep, muddy walk up through the woods to get there, so we're bad shoes. With that info we drove about 20 minutes out into the countryside of the town, so no cars were really coming past us at this point, and luckily got to the destination as our phones lost service right at this point. We found a good place to park on the side of the road and tread our way up the steep hill. Our friend was right, and it took us a while to get up, but the walk was worth it because ahead of us was a beautiful cabin with custom wooden carved statues out in front of the house and a unique copper roof. Any first analysis made me think this was a vacation home because of the size of the structure, but it was too torn up on the side of the house to be anything at this point. I wouldn't say the building could be called abandoned because all it needed was a little renovation to be as good as new. Of course, we couldn't resist exploring this location and brave the broken wall to gain entry. It led us to the inside main living room, which, without the context of the outer house, you would think was a hotel lobby. We turned on our phone flashlights because it had gotten darker outside and didn't help the inside's interior lighting. We took videos and Snapchats of the place and made our way to the basement after Zach called us to it. We all were a bit jumpy and nervous at this point but had to see what was down there. I couldn't explain why I felt so anxious because the place didn't give off horror movie vibes, but something about the chilling coldness of the basement seeping through the bottom of the door was very odd, especially since it was so warm outside. After a bit of arguing over whether we should leave the door closed and move on our way, we decided to open it. Ethan was the one to man up and slowly edge the door open. We all got instantly quieter and started to push each other slowly down the steps. It was very dark, but a green glowing light around the corner wall of the steps was flickering in and out. I was leading the group, and as I went to turn my head to see what was down there, a huge stomping sound approached rapidly, causing me to turn quickly and scream for everyone to run. We all bolt up the steps and hear stomping behind us. We run to the hill, and as I get ready to dip down it, Zach drops down and stares at the house. Whoever had been behind us was no longer there, so I dropped beside Zach, Dalton, and Ethan. In a normal situation people would leave, but as I said before, this town is very boring, and we never get to have this much going on in our lives. It was so dark that the person could not have seen us, which was good but also bad because we wouldn't be able to see them. We lay there in silence for a moment and stared at the house. We all hold our breath as we hear something scraping the wood inside the house. A man comes out dragging something in a large trash bag. It could have been a body, but Zach said it could be a deer. Ethan and I, being how we are, instantly assumed it was a body. The man seemed in a hurry and dragged whatever was in the bag onto a four-wheeler, which we didn't notice earlier at the front of the house. What was strange, though, is when he turned the lights on, the vehicle in front of it on the road had a tremendous amount of blood covering the pavement and looked as if something was dragged across it to create the blood trail. And as he drove away, I got a better look at the bag and noticed it could not have been a deer because it was too small and extended farther outwards instead of being more large scale like an animal would be. After watching all this go down, we went back down to the car and went home. About a year later we don't think about it much, but it was recently brought up in a conversation with kids at school, and no one believes us after all of us swore it happened. We didn't end up telling parents or police about this situation because of the fear of getting in trouble, and none of this did really amount to anything other than us getting scared, but I wanted to share this experience to see what everyone else thinks about it. Being watched while camping in the deep woods. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, many people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long, without anything else going for you, at least. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. The trailhead is about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles around. In the past, there have been many vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Occasionally, there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. The roads are very rough, yet you'll often see beat-up $500 cars barreling along them, even though they are meant for 4x4 vehicles. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest, probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decided to keep on looking, so we drove for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in excellent shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed odd. That said, it was dark at this point, and we would rather not keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle lying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, so I mistakenly assumed that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seems strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We glance at each other and agree that we don't need to see what that light was. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple hundred feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around. Is wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. We had likely been away for nearly an hour at this point. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to go use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. "They're locked up in the cab of the truck, did you unlock it?" We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. "Isaac, what were you doing after we left?" I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone, then I fell asleep, I guess." "But, you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets?" Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are far too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We choose not to pack up the tent, instead, we simply fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything inside. We jump in the F-150, and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drove forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, it must have just been balanced on top, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer, though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier many times since then, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. Odd woman on a forest trail. I just got home from my daily walk in the forest, so this just happened. I like to walk this dirt trail that cuts through the forest about half-mile from the house. It's in the middle of the city, so even though it feels secluded and gives me the sense of connecting with nature, there's still the chance of running into some interesting humans. I prefer the wild deer. I usually go much later in the evening, and I'm usually the only person on the 1.5-mile long trail. Today I went earlier, and to my dismay I saw a man in business casual attire enter the trail ahead of me. At one point I saw him look back and then burst into this joyful run. I wasn't going to judge because I've fully skipped on this trail. I'm a 48-year-old man-child. I saw that ahead of him there was a woman with a baseball-style cap on, just standing at my favorite spot on the trail. The forest canopy opens up there, and it just feels different at this spot. I had a magical meeting with a large stag on the summer solstice just weeks ago. At any rate, I noticed once he got to her, he stopped and talked for a bit. For whatever reason it just seemed odd, and then he walked on. When he encountered a man and his boys walking together, he halted them and engaged them in a brief conversation. I thought to myself, he's giving them a heads up about her, I bet. I wondered if she propositioned him. Ugh. Then I arrived at her location on the trail. I always break off a bundle of black locust thorns on the way into the trails. I'm pagan, so I carry them for spiritual protection, and I'm a little guy, so I carry them for physical protection as well. I pulled an earbud out and said, "Hello," to her. She looked fairly normal. She appeared to be a white woman, possibly in her late 40s, dressed modestly, with long, dark, wavy hair that was tinged with gray. She wore a baseball hat adorned with a buffalo, wore one sandal, and carried the other one. She said hi back and just kind of stared at me. I said, "How are you?" "Okay," she said sadly. I continued walking. I walked to the end of the trail and into a park and then made my way back. About a half hour had passed. I turned around and headed back the way I came. When I rounded the corner, I could see she was still standing there holding her sandal in her hand. When I got to her this time, she said, "You look like my friends." I was thinking in my head, that's plural. She then said, "Yes, several of them. Mixed together." I laughed at that. And she said, "There's that laugh." I inquired if she was disoriented or in need of assistance. She said she was supposed to meet a friend, but they weren't there. She thought if she left, they would think she ditched them. I asked her what time they were supposed to meet. And she replied, "No specific time." She asked me where the trail came out, and I explained it would exit by the river. I told her that where she entered the trail was next to a park. I suggested that maybe that's where they were supposed to meet, but she had turned too soon. She smiled oddly and said that happens a lot in her life, turning too soon. I laughed and said, "I totally understand." She stopped smiling and said, "There's that laugh again." I asked her if she was on something, not that I cared, but I wanted to help. She said yes. I said, "Mushrooms?" She replied enthusiastically, "Mushrooms? Yes, I am famished. Can I walk with you through the forest?" I let her know that was fine. We walked about 20 feet, her one sandal in her hand, then she stopped suddenly. "Are the rocks hurting your foot?" "They believe you'd think rocks feel on a foot. I can't feel pain anymore." "Be careful," I said, "there are many black locust trees all along here, and the thorns are huge. You would rather not step on them." "How do you know about these trees?" she asked. I explained I was pagan and the meaning behind the thorns. I asked if she was going to keep going forward or going back to the park. "I thought we were going to your dad's house?" she said. Feet planted, not wanting to move. I explained I didn't mention my father and that I was going home. She was still welcome to walk with me. She took another 10 or 15 steps and then stopped suddenly, like she was afraid to keep going. I said, "I don't know what your ultimate destination is, but there is nothing wrong with enjoying the forest. The deer will be out soon, and they're good company. I'm going to continue walking home. You can go either direction to get out. I walk this trail every day. If I see you tomorrow, I'll say hello. I put my headphones back in and continued on my walk. A deer and her fawn were at the end of the trail eating berries. I turned around, and the woman was in the same spot, just standing there, staring back at me. Afterthought, I didn't want to call the police because if she was on a hallucinogenic drug, which I think she was, it will wear off, and she wasn't in any harm that I could see. There was a woman with a dog walking into the trail as I was walking out, and I let her know there was a confused lady on the trail who seemed harmless, but I thought it best she be prepared. She thanked me. I hope this qualifies as a creepy encounter, because it creeped me out. Take care. A surreal experience of being stalked in the mountains. For some context, this all happened 3 years ago, exactly this time of year, too. I was 28 years old at the time, and I am a 6'2" male. Behind my house is a series of mountains. I live in a desert/forest. The events occurred on the foothills of a much taller mountain located just behind them. Between the two peaks, the Bench Mountain and the taller one, is a vast valley of uneven terrain and forest with cougars and bears. One day I was hiking around the foothills of the lower mountains. Below the towering peaks are some foothills with short, round grass hills and various trails right outside of the city. I usually explore the south end of these foothills, but one day I hiked all the way to the north side. First I noticed how much more rugged these foothills were. I am about 1 mile outside of town in the lower region of the foothills. I found a buried structure. It looked like it must have been there hundreds of years because it was old, decrepit, and run down. There was a door hole and a small chamber with what looked like some ceremonial altar in the middle with a small metal bowl. There wasn't enough room to stand up, and it would have been very hard to get through this eerily small door hole. I immediately had a feeling telling me to not go in there, but I popped my head in anyways. Again, the chamber was about the size of a dog kennel with a cement block in the middle, looking to be some altar, and a metal bowl imprinted in the top. I took a few photos and left. I hiked up higher into the foothills and sat down to rest. While smoking a cigarette, I scanned the hills above me and saw 2 figures on a hilltop. They were far away, but I could tell they were staring at me. One of them looked at the other and then pointed directly at me. There was something really weird about this. The other one touched the other, then pointed down at me again. They began descending the steep hill in my direction. Even though they were far, these 2 figures looked ominously tall. When I looked up, they stopped immediately. Then one again pointed at me, and they both looked at each other. I looked back at the valley and back to them, and they were coming down from the faraway hill toward me again until they noticed I was looking and stopped. I chuckled and looked at them and got a terrible feeling. Then the 2 figures began running full speed down the hill. I stood up and pretended to play it cool. I'm going to walk away normally and pretend not to be fazed, I thought. I walked down the hill where I had been sitting, into a small basin, and began following the main road trail back toward the trailhead. That was weird, I thought. As I moved away from the basin, the 2 figures appeared on top of a shorter hill directly above the trail I was on. They were much closer now and were tailing me aggressively. One of them yelled something unintelligible and whistled at me. They continued to get closer. I ditched the plan to follow the trail the 5 miles back and began heading directly for the nearest edge of town. I descended down another row of hills and thought I had lost them, but once again, the 2 figures appeared on the hill that I had just descended. One of them pointed at me and shouted something unintelligible to the other. I began heading down another set of rolling hills toward the edge of town. I could hear their voices getting closer. They were now within earshot. I heard them both catcalling and whistling at me, saying things like, "Hey, where are you going? Come here, boy. Hey, what's up, man? We just want to talk." As these men caught up, I noticed something off about them in general. Their clothes were otherworldly. I don't know how else to describe it. And their faces were as pale as ghosts. Their faces were also unusually tall. They looked like clowns without the clown mask, if that makes sense. I began descending the final hill toward the edge of town. This hill dropped down steeply, and I eventually came to a short cliff. Duck. That was my thought at the time. There was no way to get down. I could hear the 2 strange figures getting very close, muttering unintelligible words in a high-pitched, sickly voice. They were still getting closer. I called my dad. In all hindsight, I should have called the police, but at the time weed was illegal, and I would rather not get in any more trouble. I was already in some trouble at the time for a weed charge. I thought perhaps the 2 figures could be police trying to bust me in a sick way. I got on the phone with my dad. I attempted to maintain composure, saying, "Dad, I urgently need you to come get me. It's urgent. I am near Grandma and Grandpa's house. Wait, what? George who? I have no idea what they want, I said, hearing one of them holler at me in a creepy clown-like voice. They were now about 20 yards behind me. Dad, I need you to come get me now. George, where are you? What the hell is going on? Both my parents screamed. Two weird guys are following me. I am by Grandpa's house. Okay, I am on my way, my dad said. As soon as I descended the last hill, I hopped a cage fence and entered a paved trail. I felt relieved and looked back and saw the two men now about 80 yards back. They both looked down as if trying to hide as soon as I saw them. They had somehow made it to the trail but hadn't caught me. I walked fast, now too terrified to look back. I hopped a fence and entered a random yard and began running as fast as I could. As soon as I had hoped a few more yards, I saw my dad pull up. I got in. I have never witnessed my father acting so fearfully. Not even in all my childhood. Thanks, I said. I was unbelievably shaken. Are you okay? What happened? He asked. I related the whole story back to him and later to the rest of my family, and they were all just as bewildered as I was. I had never had an experience like that before. I have no idea what they could have wanted or why they pursued me so aggressively for over 2 miles back to town. The thing is, I had hiked and camped in those mountains my entire life and have never had anything like that happen. No matter how familiar you are with a wilderness, you just never know what could be lurking there. A few weeks later I had gotten back into hiking in my familiar area of the foothills. I honestly figured if I never went back to that area, then there would be no more problems. One night around 2 a.m., I was half asleep when I heard someone working on the fence in our side yard. The next day, we got a notification that a man in strange clothing tried to get into our garage. The posture, stride, and demeanor of this man were exactly those of the two clown-like figures who'd stalked me before. The very last encounter I had came about a week after the last, with the three men nearly meeting me at the T in the trail. At least that's how I perceived their intentions, but once again I found myself completely doubting the accuracy of these bizarre encounters. I was on a hike, and at this point I was half expecting something weird to happen, but I didn't want to be scared out of the foothills I had come to love. Everything seemed normal, and I again thought that those experiences couldn't have been real. I had to have misunderstood something. When I was getting to the top of that same hill with the T trail, I scanned the mountains above me and saw two shadow figures on top of a much taller column of rolling hills. These hills bordered the rocky peak of this foothill. I saw these two shadow figures just standing there, and they spotted me. A lot of hunters go up there to hunt deer, elk, and even mountain lions. It's not unusual to see someone go up that high. One pointed at me and looked at the other just like before. I stared at them. They stared at me. The other pointed at me, and they both looked at each other and began hiking down the massive slope toward me. I had had enough of this. I stood there and pretended to smoke. I had my bear spray ready. I did not have a firearm. Looking back, it would have been wise to have had one. The two figures were taking a very treacherous path off of any logical path and were coming down the slopes directly towards me. As they got closer, I could make out some features. They were both carrying rifles over their shoulders. No backing shown now. One was burly and bald with a reddish beard. The other was smaller, missing teeth, with the blackest hair I have ever seen, and they looked like they hadn't seen civilized life in the last 10 years. We stared at each other as they walked over to me. They were walking towards me, almost as if they were about to charge. The bald guy had an ice-cold, emotionless look. He didn't change his expression the entire encounter. "How's it going?" I asked sternly, or loudly. "How's it going?" said the larger man. He didn't sound friendly. At all. It almost felt like these were two undercover police, and they were going to hassle me. The larger man walked toward me quickly, and when he was 7 feet away, he quickened his pace, and it looked like he was about to lunge at me. "Hey! Let's go this way. Let's go this way. Come on, Tud," the smaller guy stated. The smaller guy then gave me a death glare and told me to off myself, and they both began very slowly walking down the hill away from me. I just stared at them. Every 30 seconds they would pause and wait. I stood there for an hour, until I realized they would soon disappear. The weird thing about this incident was there wasn't even a path behind me. That guy was going to charge at me, and I was cornered. I had my hand on the bear spray and was about to act. But that situation could have gone very differently. Two crazy men and their rifles would not be defeated by a can of bear spray. I was lucky that they didn't really want to hurt me. Even 3 years later, I'm still puzzled by all this. I haven't had anything like it happen since. I have gone hiking a lot since then too. It took time for me to be comfortable enough to go up there again. I didn't go back for a few months at least. The person in the woods behind my house. I, 24F, live in a basement suite with my fiancée, 26F. We live below a man and his young daughter. We're on good terms and look out for one another, but we don't socialize much. It's a normal detached home that has been converted into 2 separate living spaces. We have no windows facing the backyard. Our windows are only on the left and right sides of the house. We live together, but the only issue is hearing what's happening upstairs. I am also an extremely deep sleeper. Behind our backyard is a ravine, basically a tiny creek, but it's incredibly steep on either side, covered in bushes, trees, etc. It's not exactly easy to walk around in. We have a short, maybe 4-foot tall, chain-link fence dividing our property from the creek. One house down there is a little path that leads down to the creek and connects to an adjacent field and playground. It's maintained. There are no other paths off of the main one. It is just prickly bushes and steep, tough terrain. Okay, on to the story. About 3 months ago, my fiancée woke me up terrified because she had heard banging outside and there were flashlights shining into our ground-level windows. I instantly called 911, who promptly told me the cops were already there and probably the ones with flashlights. Annoyed, I pulled on some pants and headed outside to see what was happening. The police informed me that the man above me had called them because he reported people harassing him on his property. They ask if we know of any ongoing mental health issues on his side, which makes me question if anything actually happened, but my fiancé did hear some weird shit before the cops showed up. All the while I'm watching my neighbor plead with the police to check the creek out back, because he swears he saw them go out that way. They briefly shine their flashlights back there and leave, determining nothing is actually going on. I get the lowdown the next day. Apparently, he heard people banging on his back door, throwing gravel at his windows, and watched his front door handle turn. The man was freaked out, terrified for his daughter, and had no clue who it could be. He spends the next week barely sleeping, sitting by the back door with a baseball bat. Nothing happens, we all relax. It happens again a week later, as soon as he chills out. Same deal, my fiancé wakes me up, less scared because we know what's going on, but nevertheless the cops find nothing, and the upstairs man is freaked again. This time he installs cameras. They are on the inside of his house, pointing out the windows. They're rather small and difficult to notice, and there's no way you could see them at night. This seems to do the trick. We no longer are dealing with the cops or the banging from whoever is harassing our neighbor. However, after about a month, I get chatting in the yard with the neighbor, and he tells me almost every single night someone has been in the creek shining a light into his windows. Specifically, it's his bedroom that is affected. There are laser pointers and flashlights everywhere. It's coming from the creek. I'm a little freaked out, but I tell myself he's overly paranoid. There could be some lights from the other side. Blah blah blah. This keeps going on. He consistently is complaining about these lights. Concerned someone is still ducking with him, and with being in the same house, last week I said, duck it, and bought the best outdoor camera I could afford, with all the fancy night vision features. Real-Link Duo 2. Doesn't hurt to have security cams anyways, right? It should be arriving soon. In the meantime, I'm thinking of some way to keep someone out of the creek, still slightly doubtful anyone could get back there without hopping our fence. I walk down the path open to public use, stop where the property fence lines start, push past a prickly bush that tries to take me out, and come across a well-worn path. With footprints and broken branches. And flattened bushes that have clearly been walked on repeatedly. Creeped out, I push on to see where this path goes, and it ends right at our property. Right where my neighbor says the lights come from. There is nowhere else to go, the path is right next to where it drops off into the creek. I couldn't go further, as it was all a thick brush. It just ends at our house. Someone, for weeks, has been sitting in the woods behind our house tormenting my upstairs neighbor for no apparent reason. I am unbelievably creeped out. How did they know what bedroom he's in? How did they know when the cameras went up? Why did they never bother us? He swears up and down he doesn't have any enemies. His ex is the mother of his daughter, they share custody, and she wouldn't scare her like that. I'm as baffled as I am horrified. In the woods. My wife and I moved to some land I inherited in the boonies of Oklahoma. We love it here, and in the past year we got a manufactured home. For the first 2 years, we lived in a small converted shop. We made it like a small barn dominium, wrong spelling, I'm sure. We moved in around December of 2020. Shortly after we moved in, I put a small fence around the shop so we could get a dog. As I was working on the fence and listening to my headphones, I heard what sounded like a woman moaning from the woods. Half the property is forested, with the shop being on the perimeter of the trees. Over the next couple of months, I hear the same noise several times, Usually when I'm outside doing work, often close to evening. But then I hear it while inside the shop/house. Always coming from the woods. Lot was creepy, so I told my now wife, who at the time said she never heard it. After a couple of weeks, she calls me while I'm working and says she heard it. Over the next year or so, we hear it every so often a couple of times while together. Sometimes I would grab my gun and go outside and look around the shop, and nothing. Fast forward to early 2021, my wife's best friend comes and is hanging out at the house waiting for my wife to get off. We are best friends with her and her husband. I and she are talking and catching up, and I hear my Great Pyrenees losing his mind outside. It's like 10 at night. Now we got the dog a few months prior after our first batch of chickens were killed due to raccoons. He is a great dog and has free range of the property. This breed of dogs barks at everything, but I can normally tell when it's about something serious, and I have never even to this day heard him like this. We go outside with a cheap flashlight. He is staring at something in the distance, like 40 to 50 feet, and when he sees us, he panics. He gets in front of me and tries to get me to back up. The light we had showed I shine maybe 2.5 to 3 feet off the ground. I run back inside to get my better light and a gun. Why I didn't grab them before, I don't know, and go back to where the dog and friend were. This light is dang near a spotlight, and I shine the property up, and nothing. The next day I go where we saw it, and there are no footprints. The friend said she didn't hear it run off. Where we saw the eyes was maybe 30 feet from the tree line. So after this incident, we are still hearing the noise. That fall, we have a calf born. After a week or so it disappears. The mother is in a panic, running from one end of the property to the other and crying. I, my wife, and our neighbors search our property and surrounding properties and are unable to find the calf. There are no signs of the incident. A few months pass, and we stop hearing the moaning. My neighbor in passing goes, "Oh, yeah, by the way, the man who lives north of me shot a big cat around the time your calf went missing. Apparently it was bigger than a bobcat with a long tail, aka my lion." Since around that time, no more weird noises. Crazy to think I was out in the woods on countless occasions with a possible mountain lion hanging out around my property, including walking to a deer stand in the dark. It might be more anticlimactic, but we spent nearly 2 years thinking we had a ghost. I got followed in the woods twice by the same guy. I am a late 20s F, and this happened fairly recently. Nothing terrible happened to me, but I'm lucky it didn't, and it easily could have. There is a conservation area that I used to like to walk in regularly. It's beside a golf course, near an ordinary subdivision, just off a busy road, and is popular with dog walkers and photographers. The conservation area is fairly well maintained and alerts its users that there are hidden cameras everywhere. My point in mentioning this is to emphasize that by all accounts, this is a very safe and typical urban wooded area. One big thing about me is that I like to recharge in isolation. I dislike crowded trails and, by convention, go in off-peak hours or when the weather is unpleasant. Not dangerous, but unpleasant, too cold, lightly raining, foggy, etc. I stay safe, but I like there to be as few people around as possible. In a city, in daylight, I don't feel like I'm taking any risks by doing this. First encounter. There was one day I went at around 4 p.m. or so on a frigid, rainy Monday in November. On days like that, there are maybe only 1 or 2 dog walkers, but today, there was no car in the parking lot except for a dirty blue pickup truck with a man sitting in it. I noticed that he was looking at me, but that didn't really bother me. I was just happy to see the trail was empty. On this particular day, I went to the area to practice my navigation skills. I was learning to use a compass then, and it's good to practice in a safe area. So I decided to go off trail to a big pine plantation, which is a big, open area with large, mature pine trees, if you are not familiar. It's not a hiking area or really that interesting in any way. And definitely off trail, you wouldn't get there unless you really wanted to get there. So I pick my first landmark and sight it using my compass, and I'm pacing towards it. I find myself about halfway there when I hear rustling through bushes, and I turn around to see the man from the dirty blue pickup truck there, entering the pine plantation. The man, a mid-50s white man with a slight build, is dressed in a baggy beige cardigan and blue slacks. I feel pretty alert at this point. Feels out of place somehow. I take note but pretend to keep walking around with my compass because I don't want to seem weird. I look at him. He pretends to ignore me. I am getting a really bad gut feeling about the situation for some reason at this point, and I feel like he's following me. But I have an anxiety disorder, so I try not to freak out for zero reason, and I don't want to ruin my relaxation time. It's just a guy walking around. No big deal. To see if he's following me, I pivot 180 degrees and walk directly towards the trail again. He's still following me. I walk through the bushes, onto the trail. Still following me. At this point I was freaked out. The pine plantation entrance is only about 50 feet on the trail, so this person would have walked 50 feet, entered the pine plantation, and then decided that was it for the day? Bad odds. Definitely following me. I quickly exit the trail, and when I'm leaving the parking lot, I see that he's still looking at me. I take the long way home. The experience freaks me out, and I only visit the area once before the second encounter. Second encounter. This time was in January. This time, I want to go birdwatching. A week prior I had seen an owl in the same pine plantation. I was practicing navigation again, and I wanted to see it again. I had seen it about an hour before sundown, so I figured that was a good time to try to see it again in the same area. I checked the parking lot, and there was no blue pickup truck, but there were 2 other cars, each with a man inside. One was a red sedan with heavily tinted windows, and it looked like the other one was empty. So I go on the trail again. Today is muddy, wet, and cold. The area should be totally empty. Good. Unfortunately, this isn't the case. About 20 feet down the trail, I hear footsteps behind me. I don't like when people walk behind me, but it's not a crime, and I'll lose them soon when I go to the pine plantation. I'm sure you know where this is going. When I walk on the pine plantation, there is the same rustling of the bushes as before, and when I turn around, I see the same man from before. I feel a wave of terror and dread overcome me, alone in a muddy forest with a possible stalker. Yet, the forest remains eerily calm, making the situation feel strangely mundane. To confirm my fears, I walk over to the area where I saw the owl last week and pause to look for it. Who do I see next to me? The same freaking guy from before. I am terrified at this point, and every part of me is screaming, "Run!" So I walk as fast as I can to the trail again. I pass some other random guy in the same pine plantation and smile at him, just totally on autopilot. He smiles back. It wasn't until I was in the parking lot where I get freaked out that there was a second person in the same pine plantation. Could there be some connection between them? I stop briefly in the parking lot and take out a small notepad to quickly write down the license plates of the 2 cars. This gives the original man time to catch up to the parking lot. I am booking it, on foot, out of the parking lot, and he yells towards me, "Can I give you a ride?" And I just shake my head and keep walking. As I walk away, he begins to follow me in his car. He waits at the intersection to see which direction I'm going in, and I decide to walk in a busy park to lose him. He pulls into a nearby hidden driveway, stares at me, and pulls out his phone, presumably to take a photo of me. He notes what direction I'm walking in, then does a U-turn and drives fast the other way. Conclusion. I took the long way home, filled out a police report, and the police opened an investigation on it. I have not gone back to the conservation area since, and the experience has definitely left me with an ongoing nervousness about being alone. Doubly more because I do not know who the second guy is. I passed him so quickly I only know that he was in his mid-50s and had glasses and was bald. The police, unfortunately, told me there's nothing they can really do at this point. So the best I can do is stay vigilant and try not to let it freak me out too much. Unfortunately, this has totally ruined my love for going out into the wilderness alone. Nothing bad happened, but I think that was more because I was able to escape and lose them, before anything did. If I were being stalked by a cryptid in these encounters, which ones would it be? I grew up on a farm in the middle of a very rural, hilly area, eastern KY, and my house was surrounded by woods. We owned several acres ourselves, but around us the farmers owned hundreds of acres, raising cows and tobacco, and as kids my brother, my sister, and I were allowed to run around, hike, and explore as we liked. Coming from country folk, we were familiar with animals and dangers of the environment. We lived by a major river, and the hills we lived in were as steep and tall as some mountains, and we were taught to carry weapons at an early age to protect ourselves. My brother carried a .22 at 10, and I always carried a hard cane or machete, though after several of the incidents I'll describe, I began to carry a gun as well. Very old school. Anyway, my brother and I were introverts who loved to take solitary walks, and there was one holler behind our house that was particularly beautiful. It was fully wooded, had a nice creek, and there were rock walls and piles of stones that had once been a small house and outbuildings but had long collapsed. If you walked all the way to the back of the holler where the house once stood, you found a large round area with a circular pond and a large tree that split into 2 trees and stood right in the middle of the water, which was fed by a small spring. There was also a small waterfall and a huge, old tree with a hole in it halfway up the trunk big enough for a grown man to sit in. Super magical to a kid. We were always lured to this place and would sneak to the very back as often as we could, even though our parents always told us to leave the old stone buildings alone. But once we got back there would come a point where we would suddenly feel very, very scared and would have to leave. This only began to happen when we were teenagers. When we were younger everything was fine, which is why it is so strange. Our dogs would often go with us back into the holler, but they liked to chase animals and would often run off and leave us. Things would only start to feel strange and scary once they were gone and we were alone. Once it happened when a dog was with me, though, and I'm going to tell you about it. I'll also tell you what animal/cryptid I think was causing it. My brother was the first to start reporting that the holler was scary. He was older and would venture alone before me. He liked to hunt too. He said that he started to feel like he was being watched, and he even began to feel like he was being followed when he was there. Leaves stayed on the ground in that holler year-round, and he swore to my dad that he was being followed because he would stop walking, but the leaves behind him would keep crunching for a few moments, as if something else were walking along and stopped a few moments after him. The trees are quite dense, and he says he could never see anything, but he would shout aggressively, let off a gunshot, and even run back the way he came to see if he could flush anything out. He never saw anything specific, but he thought he heard other sounds, like low growls sometimes. He also noticed that the forest would go quiet, which is always a bad sign. Then an incident happened where my brother was walking at the very bottom of the holler and playing around in the creek, and a large stone boulder came rolling out of nowhere right at him. Like I said, the hills there are steep and landslides aren't uncommon, but this was just one boulder among an otherwise still forest. He immediately came home and told our dad, and our dad told him to stay out of that holler in case it was a weird person back there being creepy. Drug dealers had just started to move into the area at this time, and we had been having trouble with occasional robbery attempts. You would think that this would scare me away from the holler as well, right? Up to this point, I had not walked alone in it. I'd always gone with my brother, but when he started to refuse to go back there, I started going alone. I absolutely loved the woods and spent a lot of time in them. I had a big imagination and loved to play pretend even as a teenager. This holler was very pretty and very cool in the summer, and the creek was really good for swimming because it was limestone and clear. The pond was gorgeous, like something out of a fantasy novel. I read a lot of novels, and I honestly saw myself as an elfin princess or brave explorer whenever I ventured off. I was also very sheltered. I honestly had no idea how dangerous it could be and really thought the world was like a book. When I was at the back of our farm, I could see the creek and the holler opening with its tall trees and butterflies buzzing about, and I always just wanted to go play or even just stand or sit somewhere in the trees. It was just a very pretty, quiet place, and I liked to pretend I lived there. Until the creepy things began happening to me. I would be playing along, I had an MP3 player and would listen to music, dance, climb trees, play in the water, or just walk around looking at things and taking pictures, read books, and suddenly, it would happen. I would realize that the woods were completely quiet. I would look around and start to feel very uneasy, like I was being watched. It was always after the dogs had gotten bored and ventured off. I would become very conscious and realize that I wanted to leave, but for some reason, I was always too scared to just walk away. I always felt, very, very strongly, that if I kept my back turned, something would creep up on me. I was so scared that I would walk on the stones in the middle of the creek, to make it more difficult for something to run straight at me, and I would walk backwards, looking all around me except for brief moments to glance at where I was walking. I'm telling you, I felt like I was in a blinking contest that, if lost, meant my death, and I kept my eyes on the side of the creek that always made me feel danger, the side where the pond and house ruins lay. Halfway back to my house, a stone cellar was built into the hillside. When I was little, it had a door, but when I was older, it was just a dark, open doorway, and it used to scare me very badly during these times. I always felt like it was a portal to somewhere evil. I never felt safe until I had walked all the way to the hill my house sat on, climbed it, still staring backwards, climbed the fence into our fields, and made it into our barn. At that point, I would absolutely sprint back to our house. I never told my dad or family about it because my brother was told not to go back there, and I knew I would get in trouble if I said I had. My family was an old school, whip for punishment family, and I never wanted to risk it. Afterwards, I would always swear to myself that I was never going back there, ever. I would think about bears or cougars, which occasionally passed through the area, and how I would have died and probably never been found if one had charged and eaten me. We ran a farm and occasionally dumped bodies of dead animals over this hillside for the predators to eat. I knew how fast a body could disappear in woods where coyotes lived. But still, after a few weeks or maybe a month, the encounter would fade from my mind, and when I would see the holler opening, I was always tempted to climb down the hill and visit the creek. I always told myself I would not walk to the back, but the bad, scary feeling was never there at first, and I always ended up walking a little farther and a little farther until I was at the back. Then it would all happen again. After the first 2 times, I started carrying a gun, and eventually I was actually attacked by something. I had one of our dogs with us, a red heeler/hound named Ginger. She was the best dog that ever lived. Extremely maternal, she took care of all baby animals, and my parents always joked that she helped raise us kids. She was the alpha of our farm, very protective, dominant, and aggressive toward creatures that were not her family. While she chased rabbits on walks when she was young, she tended to stick with humans as she got older. She was probably around 12 years old at this time, and she decided to stay right with me while I took a short walk back in the cursed holler. When I got scared, I turned back like usual, but this time I felt less cautious because Ginger was with me. I reasoned that my dog would know if anything was really wrong and that she would alert me. Because of this, when I reached the hill that my house was on, I decided to walk up it without looking backwards like I normally did. I was attacked halfway up. I don't know by what, exactly. I honestly did not get a good look. I know that it was completely silent and that it was almost on me before either Ginger or I knew it. All I remember is hearing a noise in the grass, seeing Ginger turn and charge with fur raised, and something large and dark behind me when I turned. Like I said, Ginger is a very aggressive, protective dog. Whatever the creature was, she was snarling and on it by the time I turned to see it. The minute they collided, the creature began snarling in the most horrible, loud voice I have ever heard. It wasn't inhuman. I've heard animals snarl, and it sounded like an animal. But it was incredibly loud, it made me flinch and fall down. Ginger was snarling too, which made it all sound a lot worse, but it sounded like she was fighting some sort of cat. Anyway, Ginger and this creature, snarling and fighting, start rolling down the hill, which was steep and had some drop-offs, and in seconds they were out of sight. I was sitting on the ground and could hear them fighting, but I was absolutely terrified and just sat there for a moment, not knowing what to do. When I did get up, and I am very ashamed to say this now, I ran straight home. I did not run down over the hillside to help Ginger. I was absolutely terrified, and even though I had a gun, I knew I could not shoot whatever it was without hitting Ginger. In my 15-year-old mind, the best thing to do was run to the house and get my dad, who could figure anything out, and all I prayed was that Ginger stayed alive long enough for us to get her. So I ran the rest of the way up the hill, completely jumped the fence, ran straight to the house, screaming at the top of my lungs, and got my dad. He rushed over the hillside with me, with a much bigger rifle in hand, and we looked for Ginger. We could not find her anywhere, but I described what happened to my dad, and my brother, who joined us, and we searched the holler for her, up and down. He found scuff marks and fur on the hillside but otherwise found no trace. No signs, no sounds, no blood, other than a small amount on the hillside. Eventually evening fell, and we called it a day and went home. We were all heartbroken, and I felt horribly guilty because I knew that I had gotten our dog killed, my family didn't blame me, and my dad said I did the right thing. Except that Ginger came back. A little while after we were done looking and had returned to the house, my dad went onto the front porch, and there she was. She was scratched, and her fur was all messed up, and there was some blood, but she was okay and made a full recovery. And I never, ever went back into the holler again, and I will probably never go into the woods alone again. I still have no idea what the creature was that attacked, but I have 3 theories. The first 2 are not cryptids, they are coyotes or bobcats. Though usually pretty shy, when it is denning season, both animals can be aggressive and attack. It is possible that one had an active den in the holler and that the creepy watching and the attack were brought on by a territorial animal protecting its young. However, the creature seemed very dark in color to me, it followed me up a hillside and to my house, and my real guess is a black panther. Like the UK, there are stories in Kentucky of large black cats living in the area. A farmer once claimed to have found one in a cistern, and it made the newspaper when I was a kid. My dad saw it and says it was a real panther, and many of the old farmers who live in the area, who are very rational and knowledgeable about their land, claim that they have seen black cats and even shot at them. Fish and Wildlife took the creature and then said it was a large dog, but everyone in my area says it was definitely a cat, and people farmed enough and were close enough to know when a strange dog was running around the area. I've also had one other scary experience where a friend of mine left me alone in a hayfield after seeing a large black creature walk through the tall grass behind me. This was close to the holler I talked about above. Panthers are a Kentucky cryptid. What are your ideas, though? What other cryptid could have acted like this?